very fortunate to be joined by Joel Vanderkooi, who's the VP and Treasurer at Kellogg Company. This is an Ask Me Anything format where we're asking a Treasury leader questions about anything related to careers, job searches, networking and relationships, and so much more. This is your opportunity to ask some of the best treasurers in the industry for advice. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Scotty is on mute and he's monitoring the conversation. So with that, that's my invitation to you. Joel, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
Great, thank you. Glad to be here.
And we certainly thank you for joining us. Where in the world are you located?
So I am located in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Very snowy Kalamazoo, Michigan right now.
Absolutely, and I think I'm about an hour and a half east of you, and we've definitely had a snowy morning as well. So with that, let's heat it up a little bit by asking you some questions about your career. Number one, how did you come to Treasury, and what made you choose Treasury as your career?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one. Without maybe realizing it, my interest in Treasury goes pretty far back. I have a BA in economics from Calvin University, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I chose economics because my interest was really in understanding macroeconomic forces, how they impact companies, especially on the international side. Might not have considered that necessarily to be Treasury at the time, but that's kind of where the base was. And that led me into a career for about 3 years in corporate banking. So that gave me a good base to work on. From there, I went back full time to the Ross School at the University of Michigan. And there I focused on international and finance. So it kind of helped build out the skill set. From there, I've been at the Kellogg Company now for almost 26 years, most of it in Treasury, the last 13 as the corporate treasurer. Ironically, I started in the tax group, and it wasn't anything I had any background in. I'm not a CPA. In fact, never even took a class in tax. But it turned out it was a great entry point to get into an organization. We'll talk about some of that type of thinking in a little bit. It helped me learn a lot about tax, which also impacts Treasury, as anybody on international Treasury knows. Since then, I've been various parts of Treasury, pensions. I oversee 4 groups right now. One is corporate Treasury, one is commodity risk management, pensions, and then risk management, which also includes insurance. We have about 25 people globally, Battle Creek, as well as Dublin, Singapore, and in Mexico.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And this kind of follows a theme that we've had recently with speakers and guests. But did you find that some of your varied experience within finance, whether it's tax or banking, did that help you as a Treasury professional? Just knowing that you have to partner with the business the way that you do now, did that play any kind of impact, or did that have any kind of impact in your career?
Yeah, I think it does a couple things. It helps you to know people outside just the Treasury group, and anything that can help you understand your company better is a good thing. Now, I say that as somebody that hasn't had what we would call a pure finance role at Kellogg, that's really in the business. But nonetheless, it still doesn't change the fact you've really got to know the business that you're supporting. You can fall into a trap pretty easily in Treasury of, hey, the business is Treasury. We're there to support the business. This is all about supporting the business, making sure it's got the correct risks managed, capital structure matched up. And to do that well, you've got to understand what the core of the business is.
Yeah, that's a common theme that we hear with a lot of effective Treasury leaders is to be a strategic business partner, you actually have to understand and interact with other parts of the business to understand the challenges that you're facing, because you're able to bring a different perspective, and that's how you can be effective.
Yep.
So I know you kind of touched on everything that you've done so far, but is there anything that really sticks out in terms of career highlights or experiences that you've had where you're like, man, that was great experience. That's something that I can hang my hat on.
Yeah, I think, if I look at a lot of it, and this is probably true for a lot of treasurers, it's dealing with the bigger M&A type transactions. For us, that was 2012, the acquisition of Pringles just working with so many different parts of our global business to pull off the financing for that. That was great. I think it's also just working through the times of crisis. And for me, whether that's the financial crisis of 2008, especially some of the early days of COVID and the somewhat chaotic times in the markets then, those are also big deals. And then there's a little bit more of the structural side. I think for me, it's anytime you can make step changes in how you effectively manage risk. We did some things on the how we manage foreign exchange, how we manage commodities, and also personnel development. Love to see people move up in the Treasury group. Love to see it when people even go out from Treasury into the business. Having people out there that understand Treasury as well as additional connections then for the Treasury team is really a fantastic thing. Love seeing that kind of success.
Yeah, and that's an interesting piece. One of the soft spots for me is certainly leadership and developing the people that you work with and who work for you. And I think a lot of leaders lose sight of the fact that it essentially becomes your coaching tree. I mean, we were talking a little bit about football before this, but you look at the most effective coaches in the game, it's very similar to a corporate environment where if they're working under you, develop them, send them out because they're going to bring different ideas back to you, or at worst case, you have a strategic partnership elsewhere in the business or maybe in a competing business at times.
Absolutely. Yep. It's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's take you back to graduating from the Ross School of Business. I will forgive you for that. Leaders in the best, go blue. I'll say it on camera here.
Thank
you. What advice are you given to younger Joel that you wish you would have known at that time, or to analysts and managers out there looking to advance? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think the thing is, don't be just myopically focused on a company and a role. Try different things. Try things that you don't have backgrounds in. That ties in a little bit of what I said about jumping into a company in a role that maybe wasn't what I had envisioned or wasn't looking for the long term, but it gave me a great entry point. It gave me a good skill set that I would interact with for every year since then. And it started to teach me, how do you show you can jump into something you don't have a background in and be successful at it? I did that again in 2005, I think it was, when I took over the risk management insurance group. I don't think I had ever even looked at my own insurance policies before that time. I'm not sure how that necessarily qualified me to take the keys of risk management of a global company. But anytime you can jump into something new, learn it, show you can do it, it expands your skill set and it shows you have that skill set of taking on challenges. So I think that's part of one. You have to learn rapidly. The other thing is get mentoring relationships. Do that early on. Informal ones are just as important as formal. A lot of companies talk about the formal relationships, and those are great. Get the informal ones as well. It keeps you haven't necessarily solved everything by having one formal mentor relationship. You need a variety of people, variety of areas, just people you can stop by and chat with. Turns out most people are actually really receptive to that sort of thing, of people reaching out and saying, hey, can you talk about my career or tell me a little bit about what you've done? And every time you do that, you have the potential to get great advice. You again have more contacts throughout an organization, and just listening to people, you learn. Yeah. And then the final thing is a little more of a how to work thing, and that's, sometimes this is lost on people. Come with recommendations. I see too many times where people do the analysis and say, hey, here are the alternatives. I've always tried, or at least for quite a few years have tried to think, when I'm talking to people I'm reporting to, when I'm talking to the board of directors, don't present them with recommendations. Come with or don't just alternatives. Come with the recommendation of, here's what we should do and why. You might get disagreement, and that's not the worst thing in the world. Yeah. But you'll show that you're the expert, you've done the work, and you come with value added to the equation. So always try to remember that, as opposed to just saying, hey, here's what you can do. What do you want to do?
Yeah. No, that's great advice around the solutions-oriented mindset instead of just bringing problems to the table. When people have asked me about it, I kind of use the analogy of, think about that Credit Karma commercial where the bank's being robbed and the security guard is just telling everyone that the bank's being robbed instead of doing something about it. It's like, look, take the initiative, come with the plan. Don't just sit there and say, hey, we got a problem. You know, it really helps. And then the other piece to that, with Treasury professionals in general, painting with a pretty broad brush, being a little bit more risk averse, I think it is important to just get outside your comfort zone. That's where the growth is going to come from. That's where you're going to find those new experiences, and that's where you're testing yourself. And that can help with actually your own engagement with your work too.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it also, that sets up the right mindset of, you know, people can be too risk averse, not only in their career, but how they operate as well. A lot of times we talk about risk and we're talking about negative risk. It turns out if a company eliminates all negative risk, there are probably not positive risk opportunities with upside either. And then you've lost the plot of what are you really trying to do, or where do you as a company add value. So trying to get people to think not only in their careers paths, but how they operate, to take and embrace the right sort of risk with the right parameters of risk mitigation. That's a big thing as well.
Yeah. And that's where it's awesome hearing that coming from someone sitting in your seat, because at that same time, I would have to guess that you're setting your team up in a more comfortable environment to be able to take calculated risks, to be able to push the envelope where necessary, knowing that you're on the hook for this.
Yeah. The worst thing you can do as a leader is to back people in a corner of saying, essentially telling them without telling them. If you make a mistake, or if you take a position that goes against you in the market, that's a huge negative. It doesn't have to be. Now, I expect that people will do all the work, that they've done the due diligence, and they arrive at a decision in an appropriate way. But if you're going to back people into a corner of you can't ever make a mistake, you're never going to see the positives either.
Yeah. You're almost handcuffing your team with growth and innovation, or being afraid to speak up and bring solutions to the table.
Right.
So you had mentioned networking and relationships along the way. What's been your approach? Obviously, people are probably banging on your door trying to become a part of your network. But as you were climbing the ranks, how do you approach that conversation with, hey, will you be my mentor? I know there are the organic relationships, but there are some where you actually have to ask, can I pick your brain about this? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, I think one is just getting the mindset of don't be afraid to approach people, especially people at higher levels. It's something you may not know going into an organization, thinking, hey, people in those levels, they don't want to talk to people. Actually, they do. And if they don't, well, then you got probably another issue that's out there if people are trying to isolate themselves. And a lot of it isn't even saying, will you be my mentor? It's starting up conversations. It's getting to know people, finding points of either commonality or interests or whatever the case is. People are looking to give knowledge, to even just have a conversation. It doesn't even have to be, sometimes we think mentoring is this big teaching session, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's just a conversation. And both sides actually take away from that. I find, especially as I've been around here a long time, when I talk to, and I especially love talking to really new employees, college students who aren't even necessarily employees. I've had a number reach out over the years, and I love talking to college students. It actually helps me too, because quite frankly, I'm talking to now an entirely different generation. And it keeps me engaged with where people are. I get a lot out of these discussions. It isn't simply you're sitting in a chair dispensing wisdom to people. It's not really that at all. It's a two-way takeaway, and I find out that I learn just as much. But you can have these casual conversations that grow over time. They don't have to be will you be my mentor? Because that's actually kind of almost a weird forced conversation at that point. There's a lot more normal ways to have that interaction, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point, especially as a leader. I mean, you're probably managing people from 3 different generations, right? You have the new grads entering the workforce. You have, I'll hesitate to say mine and Scotty's age, and then you have some that are a little bit more experienced than that too. So you have to connect on all 3 levels to get people moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and it's all, this comes back to a point of diversity, which you should be focused on. And there's a number of angles of diversity, one of which is age groups, quite frankly. It brings a lot to a team. And there are so many angles of diversity. And this kind of ties into how do you look at assembling a team? It's just like sports in some regards. It isn't about just how do you get all of the best all-stars, the individuals. How do you get a team that works well together, that brings a full set of ways to look at things to the pitcher? And that's kind of the key.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm going to take a pause real quick. Scotty, do you have any questions, or is there anything coming in from the audience that we want to cover?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking, Joe. I actually was trying to figure out a way. This has been a great conversation. Joel, I want to say that that practical advice to people about how to engage with a prospective mentor is some of the best we've heard in these lives. So thank you for that. But actually, perhaps a technical issue I was trying to figure out on my own before coming to you, Joe. We are live streaming on YouTube. We've got a decent audience there. We are not live streaming on LinkedIn, and it would appear to me that that's a LinkedIn issue, but just want to make you aware real quick, Joe, you especially, see if there's something we can do on our end. I think people are used to watching this on LinkedIn and not YouTube. So no comments or questions yet from the YouTube audience. But yeah, I think we'll get more as we go live on YouTube, on LinkedIn, if we can figure that out.
All right, hold on real quick. Sorry about this.
No, it's no worries. And sorry I didn't say something sooner. Like I said, I thought that there was probably an issue I was personally, able to address. So.
No, it looks like we do have a LinkedIn issue. It says sending data, and we do not. We'll go through with it since we do have the viewership on YouTube. And Joel, sorry about this, man, but
that's all right. No worries.
Let's see.
Hopefully it can be posted out there eventually.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll make sure that we get a recording of this out to the general population of LinkedIn as well. So let's jump back into it. You mentioned as you're putting your team together, being strategic in how you build it. What are some of the key things that you look for in your direct reports when you go to hire into your team?
Yeah, so I'm not looking for clones. I'm not looking for, hey, if you don't have a history of Treasury, you can't come in here. Some of the people that have done really well in our group have come from outside of Treasury. Most of the things we find technically can be taught. I'm much more interested in, are you smart? Are you driven? Are you a person that people like to work with? Do you communicate well? People can do great analysis, but if I listen for 10 minutes and I have absolutely no idea what you just said, I'm not sure where the value proposition is. Yeah. And I know that if that's true for me, it's even more important as these people interact with our top executives and our board. You've got to be able to distill things. And sometimes I find people because Treasury, let's face it, like a lot of things, has its own code words. Yeah. Sometimes people coming from outside of Treasury can boil down the concepts in a non-Treasury wording better than people with a just full Treasury background. Yeah. And again, that's a big key. You just want different ways of thinking, different ways of approaching things. I don't need like I said, not clones, not a full team of extroverts. A mixture of everything does a great thing for us. And we've been very successful, people from different nationalities. It really helps how you look and run a global group like that.
Yeah. No, that's you bring up a couple of good points there, right? You need someone who's sharp and at the same time is a good team player, because like you mentioned,
Yep.
if you have a team of all-stars but they can't work together, then you have an ineffective treasury function, and
Right.
you're not going to get anything done.
That's right.
So no, that's great to know. And I guess I kind of have a feel with where you're at on this, but do you focus more on softer skills or subject matter expertise when you're looking to hire?
It's going to be a little bit of a discussion of both, but I would say the softer skills are probably the most important. There can be, if I'm talking about bringing somebody, however, and this is probably not an interview I'd be doing, but into our commodity risk management group,
Mm-hmm.
you might be looking more towards some of the technical side.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to step right into something like that.
Yeah.
Versus some other things. But other areas, I'm much more focused on the softer side. We can always teach the specific skill sets.
Yeah. And to me, from my standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, that's where it leads me to believe that you have a solid treasury function in place, or that you have a strong leadership team in place, because you understand that, hey, we don't need someone who checks every box that's coming into this. We can train people and develop them as necessary. And you have to have a strong team to do that. But a lot of leaders don't look at it that way. They want the finished product coming into their organization.
Well, and I think what can happen is if you bring in good people from other parts of your organization, and you've shown you've been successful with people coming in from other parts of your organization. This goes back to what we talked about earlier. You're going to get much better insights of what's going on in the company as a whole. And again, it comes back to, we're there to make sure the company is successful, not to make sure Treasury is successful. Treasury is only successful if the company works. And if I'm just bringing in from outside longtime Treasury experts, that may not give me what I'm looking for as far as the entire picture and the connection into the company. Now, again, it comes back to, I probably don't want everybody coming from other parts of the company with no Treasury background. You need to have a mix. And that's where you try to balance all these things off as you look at each individual spot, as you look at how you plan backfills for the next 1, 3, 5 years down the road. That's all part of the equation.
Yeah. Well, and it ties into just a hiring philosophy overall, right? Like if you're willing to flex, because I think a lot of people run into the challenge where they go to hire and they're like, this is what I need. I'm not going to flex. The market's going to flex to me. But when you give yourself those options and you know where your pushes and pulls are, or you know where you can flex on things, it makes it so much easier to hire. And those are the conversations that we have with clients daily. It's like, look, here's what's out there. Here are your options. Where can you flex on this? And a lot of people don't put that thought into it. So I love your mindset there.
Yeah.
So without trying to get you in trouble with the AFP, do you put any weight behind certifications like the CTP or the CFA?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I probably don't. But this may be my personal bias in the sense that I really don't have any of these certifications. So maybe that's how I'm thinking about it. But again, I want to see the full picture. That alone, that may be a point of a specific skill set. That's certainly part of the equation.
Yeah.
But it isn't the be all and end all. I would never post a job and say only somebody with this certification or that certification can apply, because that's not how I'm going to make a decision.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's great. And the reason why we ask that question is we get that question quite a bit from practitioners. Hey, should I be pursuing this degree? Should I be pursuing this certification? And it's like, it doesn't matter to me as much as it does to the person who's making that decision to hire you at the end of the day. So as much as you hate to say it depends, you brought it up in your answer. It comes down to personal bias and what your view is on it. And I really don't think there's a right or wrong answer. So the common advice I usually give is, hey, if it's something that you feel passionately about, you'd rather have it and not need it instead of need it and not have it. So, it's kind of how I look at it. So, Scotty, with that, do you have any questions or any comments just around the conversation that we've had so far?
Yeah, I think just to be a proxy to your point, some of the questions that we tend to get in these lives. And again, Joel, thank you so much for your patience with us. This is a learning process for us, and obviously some growing pains. But we hear from pretty much everyone we speak with today, what companies are thinking about in terms of full-time remote work in the future. So just curious what your thought is, and perhaps this puts you on the spot as well. But maybe you can speak in terms of what Kellogg's thinking about. Is full-time actual, like, real remote opportunities? Is that something you guys would consider in the future, or is that something that, as of right now, you're ready to get back to the office as soon as you can?
It's probably a mix of that, like a lot of companies. It's a strange thing to think that it's been almost a year since we've had the entire group together in the office, and probably won't change anytime real soon. We have, fortunately, the leadership here at Kellogg has done a real good job, dove into the issues, and has come out with, there are going to be policies and procedures in place to allow for much greater flexibility with location. There are always things you got to work through on the tax side. How much time do you need to spend in the office versus away? Personally, we've had situations where it's worked out really well to have an individual who lived remotely. We were able to have him continue to work for us past maybe an original planned retirement date, simply because he was able to live elsewhere in the country. And that's a big trade-off to keep expertise. And it turns out, as we've all learned in the last year, you can work remotely anyway, and it works pretty well. It'll be a challenge going forward, though. We, I think, have done well as a group over the last year because we've had a lot of consistency of who's been enrolled, that people know each other. I think as time goes by, that's something that you have to be much more choiceful about, much more focused on how you're going to interact if you're not going to all be in the office together, because that's something that can degrade over time. And, you lose some of that impromptu mentoring. It doesn't happen the same way, I don't believe, digitally as it does in the office. You're losing that water cooler discussion. It may not be a planned, hey, I learned something, but you often pick up something when you have these casual conversations. Those are things that are important of being in the office. But that said, I think what we've shown is there's much more flexibility than we ever believed possible that can still work.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer. And again, I love your mindset on it. I think, when I'm asked about it from clients, hey, should I make this remote? It's like, kind of depends. Like, you have to have a good onboarding process, and you have to really make sure that you're putting the extra effort to make sure this person understands your team culture, your company culture, and that they feel like they're a part of this, because otherwise they're staring at a computer all day, meeting people over just their immediate network over camera or Zoom meetings, whatever it may be.
Right.
Scotty, anything else?
No, nothing else from the YouTube audience as of this moment. Again, I think they're not used to interacting on that platform. So, Joel, we obviously recognize that your time is extraordinarily valuable, but perhaps we can have you back later this year.
No worries.
We will continue to build the audience here for these LinkedIn Lives, and but again, just thank you so much, because you added a ton of value that people will be able to access. It's going to live on YouTube, and as soon as we can, we'll get it up on LinkedIn as well.
Great. Happy to have these discussions anytime.
No, perfect. And allow me to echo those sentiments, Joel. Great talking to you. Great getting to know you. I think you gave a lot of great knowledge here, and we'll make sure that we do get the word out about this, even though it's not over LinkedIn Live right now. We'll make sure that it reaches the intended audience. So with that, Treasury community, thanks for tuning in. Thanks as always for the engagement. We do have more conversations lined up for you. Ask a Treasury Recruiter on Mondays, practitioner conversations on Wednesdays, Ask a Treasurer on Fridays. So with that, we'll cut you loose.